Welcome to Truth Crime Case Files. Today, we take you to the tranquil community of Sedona, Arizona, a place often associated with peace and healing. This is the story of a teenage groom, a 65-year-old bridezilla, and a marriage that ended in murder. Juan Giles was a 19-year-old with a shy and quiet demeanor. Born and raised in the small town of Cottonwood, Arizona, Juan had recently graduated from high school. He was known among his peers as the quiet kid who always had a guitar slung over his shoulder. Juan lived with his mother, Arlene Giles, in a modest trailer on the outskirts of town. Their financial situation was dire. Arlene was a single mother who had struggled to make ends meet for most of Juan's life, particularly after losing her job during the economic downturn brought on by the pandemic. The weight of their financial troubles bore down on Juan, and he often felt a strong sense of responsibility to help his mother, who was mired in debt. Despite his reserved nature, Juan had a kind heart and was the sort of person who would go out of his way to help others, even when he was struggling himself. In the days leading up to his death, Juan found himself in an increasingly strange situation. Just a week earlier, he had married Gertrude Hartford, a 65-year-old retiree. JY was known for her lavish lifestyle and had been married several times before. She insisted on a grand wedding, which took place at a luxury resort in nearby Sedona. However, Juan seemed out of place at the ceremony. He appeared nervous and uncertain about the whole situation. The sudden news of his marriage to the much older Gertrude Hartford stunned everyone who knew him. Many wondered what could have driven the gentle, introverted Juan to make such a drastic decision. Some speculated that his actions were tied to his mother's financial woes, while others feared he was being manipulated. Juan's relationship with JY was unusual, not only because of their significant age difference, but also due to JY's demanding and controlling nature. She was known for throwing tantrums when things did not go her way, leaving Juan feeling increasingly overwhelmed by her behavior. He confided in his mother about his doubts and fears, but Arlene urged him to stay in the marriage. This left Juan feeling trapped, torn between his mother's wishes and his growing discomfort with his new life. At the time of his death, Juan was still struggling to adapt to his new reality. He had distanced himself from his friends and spent most of his time in his new home with JY. His dream of becoming a musician seemed more unattainable than ever. Juan was a young man who had lost his direction, unable to envision a future that made sense to him. On the morning of October 8, 2021, the quiet town of Sedona was jolted by a grim discovery. At 8:30 a.m., Marjorie Lane was out for her daily walk when she noticed something strange at the luxurious home of Gertrude Hartford Giles. The curtains were drawn, and the front door was slightly ajar. Marjorie, who had lived in the neighborhood for more than 30 years, found this unusual, especially since Gertrude was known for her strict routine and typically kept everything in perfect order. Curious and concerned, Marjorie decided to check on the house. As she approached, she called out, but there was no response. Hesitant, she stepped inside and was immediately hit by a strong, bitter smell. That's when she saw Juan Giles lying motionless on the living room floor. His body was slumped against the couch, and scattered around him were several empty pill bottles, all prescription medications. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table beside him. Marjorie was frozen in shock, her heart racing. She knew Juan and couldn't believe what she was seeing. Fighting back tears, she quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her hands trembling as she gave the operator the address and described what she had found. When the 911 operator asked her to check for signs of life, Marjorie hesitated but did as instructed. She knelt beside Juan, gently shook his shoulder, and called his name. There was no response. She could see that his face was pale, his lips slightly blue, and his breathing had stopped. The police arrived at the Hartford Giles residence just before 9 a.m. on October 8, 2021. Leading the investigation was Detective Marla Grundle, a seasoned investigator with the Sedona Police Department known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense attitude. Detective Grundle wasted no time in assessing the scene. Accompanied by Officer Tom Jenkins, a young but eager recruit, they entered the home, which had now become the center of a tragic mystery. The living room, where Juan's body was found, was eerily quiet. Detective Grundle immediately noticed the empty pill bottles scattered around Juan and the glass of water on the coffee table. She took note of the labels: prescriptions for medications like Xanax and OxyContin, drugs often linked to overdose cases. Detective Grunwald instructed Officer Jenkins to start photographing the scene, while she called in a forensics team to dust for fingerprints and gather evidence. The coroner, Dr. Evelyn Ahn, arrived shortly after to examine the body. She confirmed that one had likely died from an overdose, but the sheer amount of drugs present, far exceeding the recommended limit, made it clear that this was no accident. As the investigation continued, Detective Grunwald's attention was drawn to a small detail: a wedding photo of Juan and Gertrude on the mantel. In the photo, Juan's expression was distant, his eyes downcast, a stark contrast to Gertrude's beaming smile. It was a subtle but telling sign that all was not well in this newly married household. The forensics team carefully collected the pill bottles, the glass of water, and any other potential evidence. They also detected a faint smell of perfume lingering in the air, a scent that Detective Grunwald recognized as Gertrude's signature fragrance, an upscale brand, Chanel No. 5. By the time they were finished, Detective Grunwald had a growing suspicion that this was more than just an overdose. The evidence increasingly pointed to foul play, and the investigation was just beginning. As the probe into Juan Giles' death deepened, the police turned their focus to the most obvious suspect, Gertrude J.Y. Hartford Giles, Juan's 65-year-old wife. When Detective Marla Grunwald and Officer Tom Jenkins arrived at J.Y.'s home later that afternoon, they found her lounging by the pool, just a few feet from where her husband had died. She was sipping a mimosa and flipping through the latest issue of Vogue. Despite the tragic circumstances, J.Y. appeared unervingly calm. Dressed in a designer kaftan and oversized sunglasses, she exuded an air of indifference that immediately caught Detective Grunwald's attention. J.Y. greeted the officers with a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. When asked about the events leading up to Juan's death, she explained that she had gone to bed early the previous night, leaving Juan in the living room to play his computer games. She claimed that when she woke up in the morning and didn't see him in bed, she assumed he had slept on the couch. She expressed surprise and some sadness upon hearing of his death, but she didn't seem particularly distraught, almost as if she had been told a distant acquaintance had passed away. During the interrogation, J.Y.'s story remained consistent, but her lack of emotion raised suspicions. She was cooperative but distant, answering questions with a rehearsed precision that left Detective Grunwald wondering if there was more to her story than she was letting on. When questioned about the pill bottles found at the scene, J.Y. stated that Juan had been struggling recently and had been prescribed medication to help him cope. She insisted that she had no idea he might overdose and suggested that perhaps Juan had taken more pills than he should have in a moment of despair. Despite her calm demeanor, Detective Grunwald noted several inconsistencies in J.Y.'s story. For one, J.Y. mentioned that Juan was playing video games, but the TV was off when Marjorie Lane discovered the body. Additionally, the bed in the master bedroom was untouched, suggesting that J.Y. may not have gone to bed at all. The more Detective Grunwald pressed, the clearer it became that J.Y. was hiding something. However, without concrete evidence, the police couldn't hold her. J.Y.'s alibi seemed airtight, but her behavior left a lingering sense of doubt. As the interrogation concluded, Detective Grunwald couldn't shake the feeling that this glamorous, poised woman was more involved in Juan's death than she let on. With Gertrude Hartford Giles remaining a person of interest, the police turned their attention to a second suspect, Arlene Giles, Juan's mother. Arlene was a woman who had faced more than her share of hardships. Her life had been a series of bad decisions, each seemingly worse than the last. Struggling with crushing debt, Arlene had resorted to selling prescription drugs under the table, a secret she had managed to keep hidden from most, but not all. Having been arrested several times, Detective Grunwald knew Arlene's desperation might have driven her to push Juan into his ill-fated marriage with Gertrude. After all, the union offered Arlene a lifeline out of her financial woes. The idea that her son's marriage could secure her future was too tempting to resist, but at what cost? When the police brought Arlene in for questioning, she appeared frazzled and nervous. Dressed in faded jeans and a worn t-shirt, she was a stark contrast to the polished image of Gertrude. Arlene's hands shook as she lit a cigarette, a habit she had picked up again in recent months, and her voice wavered as she answered the detective's questions. Arlene admitted that she had encouraged Juan to marry Gertrude, painting it as an opportunity he couldn't pass up. She spoke of the wedding held at a lavish Sedona resort, where Juan had seemed out of place amidst the opulence. Arlene claimed she had wanted the best for her son and believed Gertrude could provide both him and her with financial stability, something she had never been able to provide. However, when the conversation shifted to the drugs found at the scene, Arlene became defensive. She denied knowing anything about the massive amount of pills, insisting that Juan must have taken them himself and obtained them from somewhere else. But Detective Grunwald wasn't convinced. Arlene's financial struggles, her involvement in illegal drug sales, and her desperation to secure her future all pointed to her possible involvement. Under pressure, Arlene's composure began to crack, and the investigation into Juan's tragic death took on a new urgency. Arlene's responses grew increasingly erratic. She began to contradict herself. At one point, she claimed she hadn't seen Juan in days, then later mentioned that she had visited him the night before his death. Her nervousness and inconsistent statements only deepened the police's suspicions. With both Gertrude Hartford Giles and Arlene Giles under scrutiny, the police shifted their focus to a third suspect, Harry Hartford, Gertrude's ex-husband. Harry was a wealthy real estate mogul with a reputation for being ruthless in both business and his personal life. His latest venture involved developing retirement communities across Arizona, a lucrative enterprise that had only expanded his empire. Harry's relationship with Gertrude had ended in a bitter divorce just a few months before she married Juan. The timing of Juan's marriage to Gertrude, a much younger man, had only added insult to injury, exacerbating Harry's jealousy and lingering resentment, making him a prime suspect in the investigation. Detective Marla Grunwald and Officer Tom Jenkins decided to bring Harry in for questioning. When they arrived at his sprawling estate, they found him in his home office, surrounded by legal documents and architectural blueprints. Harry greeted them with a firm handshake, his demeanor confident and controlled. Unlike Arlene, who had been nervous and agitated, Harry was calm and composed, almost as if he had been expecting their visit. During the interrogation, Harry was cooperative, but his answers were carefully measured. He admitted he was angry about Gertrude's new marriage, describing it as a slap in my bleeping face. However, he denied any involvement in Juan's death. Harry explained that he had been preoccupied with his business and had little contact with Gertrude or Juan since the divorce. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Juan's death, Harry provided a solid alibi, claiming he had been at a business dinner in Phoenix, meeting with potential investors. Several high-profile attendees could vouch for his presence, making it challenging for the police to dispute his alibi. Despite his cooperation, Detective Grunwald couldn't shake the feeling that Harry was hiding something. His calmness seemed almost too rehearsed, as if he had prepared his responses in advance. The fact that he had been seen arguing with Gertrude just days before Juan's death only intensified the suspicion. Witnesses had reported a heated exchange between the two at a local country club, further complicating the investigation and casting doubt on Harry's seemingly perfect alibi. Harry had reportedly warned Gertrude that she would regret their divorce. While the police didn't have enough evidence to arrest Harry, his potential motives, jealousy and revenge, kept him in their sights. The investigation was far from over, and Detective Grunwald knew they needed to dig deeper to uncover the truth. On October 15, 2021, just as the investigation seemed to be stalling, a critical piece of new evidence emerged. It was a cool, sunny afternoon, with clouds beginning to form over Sedona. Detective Marla Grunwald was at the station, reviewing the case files once again, when Officer Tom Jenkins rushed in, holding a sealed envelope. It had been delivered anonymously to the station that morning, raising immediate suspicion. Inside the envelope was a USB drive. The contents of the drive were shocking. A series of text messages between Gertrude Hartford Giles and an unknown contact, dated just days before Juan's death. The messages detailed a plan Gertrude had been devising to divorce Juan and cut him out of her will, using her knowledge of Arlene Giles's illegal drug dealings as leverage. The texts were filled with Gertrude's frustration over Juan's sullen attitude and lackluster sexual performance as her husband, and her growing impatience to rid herself of him. "Sex with him is so vanilla," one message read. "His bleep is smaller than my ring finger," another chilling text stated. "If that bleep Arlene thinks she's getting away with this bleep, she's got another thing coming. I'll make sure she and that small bleep bleep pay." Detective Grunwald and her team immediately began tracing the origins of the messages. They discovered that the anonymous contact was, in fact, one of Gertrude's private investigators, someone she had hired to dig up dirt on Arlene in the days before she married Juan. This investigator had uncovered Arlene's drug-dealing activities and was feeding Gertrude the information she needed to execute her plan. With this fresh evidence in hand, the police intensified their focus on both Gertrude and Arlene. The investigation took on a new urgency as it became clear that the truth was far more complex than anyone had initially suspected. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the full story had yet to be revealed. On October 20th, 2021, as the investigation neared its breaking point, Detective Marla Grunwald received a major breakthrough. After carefully analyzing the text messages found on the USB drive and cross-referencing them with phone records, it became evident that Arlene Giles, Juan's own mother, was behind the deadly plot. Arlene had been using her son as a sexual pawn, driven by desperation and greed. The police now had sufficient evidence to arrest her. Arlene Giles was a woman who viewed life as a relentless struggle. Crushed by debt and haunted by a series of poor life choices, Arlene saw Juan's marriage to Gertrude as her way out of financial ruin. She was terrified that Juan, who was not known to have a sexual interest in women, would leave Gertrude, shattering Arlene's hopes for a consistent flow of cash. To prevent this from happening, Arlene had been secretly feeding Juan prescription drugs and sexual enhancers to keep him compliant and performing sexually. But her plan took a tragic turn when Juan accidentally overdosed, taking far more than she had intended. The twist in the case came when it was revealed that Gertrude, dissatisfied with Juan's lack of sexual enthusiasm as a husband, had been planning to divorce him and cut both him and Arlene out of her life. She had discovered Arlene's drug dealings and intended to use that information to keep them away from her money. However, Arlene, desperate to keep the marriage intact, decided to take matters into her own hands. On the night of Juan's death, Arlene gave him a stronger dose of the drugs, hoping to calm him down. But Juan, distressed over his loveless marriage and fearful of Gertrude's viciousness, took even more pills on his own, leading to a fatal overdose. Arlene had never meant to kill her son, but her actions directly caused his death. When the police confronted Arlene with the overwhelming evidence, she initially denied everything. Her demeanor was panicked and frantic, a stark contrast to her earlier calm. But as Detective Grunwald laid out the damning messages and phone records, Arlene's defenses began to crumble. She claimed she never intended to kill her son, only to keep him in the marriage until they could secure their financial future. Arlene's arrest sent shockwaves through the small towns of Sedona and Kenwood. Juan's family was devastated by the revelation that his own mother had caused his death. The community, already shaken by the bizarre circumstances of the marriage, now grappled with the tragic reality that greed and desperation had led to such a senseless loss. As Arlene was led away in handcuffs, she appeared numb, unable to fully grasp the gravity of her actions. The Giles family, overwhelmed by grief, expressed their sorrow and disbelief, struggling to come to terms with what had happened. The arrest marked the end of a dark chapter in Sedona's history, but the pain and shock would linger for a long time. Arlene Giles' trial commenced in early December 2022, drawing a packed courtroom filled with reporters from outlets such as the Arizona Republic and True Crime Weekly, all eager to cover the shocking details of the case. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Mark Christensen, 42, portrayed Arlene as a manipulative and desperate woman who had prioritized her financial needs over the life of her son. Christensen, known for his sharp intellect and relentless pursuit of justice, argued that Arlene's actions were premeditated and motivated by greed. He highlighted the text messages, phone records, and Arlene's own confession as undeniable evidence of her guilt. The defense, headed by Public Defender Carita Vasquez, 28, countered by depicting Arlene as a troubled mother who had made a terrible mistake. Vasquez, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for compassion, contended that Arlene had never intended to kill Juan. She stressed Arlene's financial struggles, her desperation to secure a better future for her family, and the fact that Juan's death was accidental. Vasquez appealed to the jury's sympathy, urging them to consider Arlene's difficult circumstances and the intense pressure she was under. Throughout the trial, Juan's family watched in agony, visibly torn apart by his mother's actions. The pain was evident in their tearful expressions, as Arlene's choices had devastated their family. On December 15, 2022, the jury reached their verdict. Arlene Giles was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The jury concluded that while Arlene's actions had indeed led to Juan's death, there was insufficient evidence to prove she had intended to kill him. As the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. Arlene remained stoic, her face pale and expressionless. The judge sentenced Arlene to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The sentence received mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient given the tragic loss of Juan's life, while others believed it was a fair reflection of Arlene's lack of intent to kill. While some viewed the sentence as appropriate given Arlene's desperate circumstances, it provided little comfort to Juan's family. They were left to grapple with the harsh reality that their loved one was gone, taken by the very person who should have protected him. The town of Sedona also struggled to process the disturbing events that had unfolded in their midst, serving as a stark reminder of how greed and desperation can lead to unimaginable actions. In the months following Arlene Giles' sentencing, the case continued to leave a deep impact on the Sedona community. The trial had left an indelible mark on everyone involved, from the Giles family to local residents. Arlene Giles was sent to the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville, a high-security facility near Phoenix. In prison, Arlene faced a challenging environment. Her case had garnered significant media attention, making her a frequent subject of gossip and judgment among her fellow inmates.
A Truth in Crime Case Solvers. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe.